Well, there's reasonably a lot of excitement for Steelers fans around their offensive lineman they drafted. What about Roman Wilson? He was a guy that we talked about maybe being a second-round pick, and they got him in the third round. I want to talk about why he could be the most impactful rookie this season. Here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Alan Saunders today. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. You know him, you love him. He's the man. Alan, we were on Final Word together for another amazing Sunday night show. Shout out, Mike.
It's a good show, too.
It was a really good one. Yeah, Mike DeFabo, Jenna Harner also on with us. But I liked one of the questions they had asked us, like, who's gonna be the most impactful rookie? And you went for Roman Wilson. And like, I totally get your line of thinking there, but explain to our audience why you think, despite all the hype around Fautanu and all the hype around Frazier, why it could be Roman Wilson who has the biggest impact in the Steelers.
Well, I think he has like right now, looking at the wide receiver room, he probably has the biggest ability to make an impact. There's nobody else to throw the ball to. I mean, it's him and George Pickens, and that's it. So he's going to get a ton of reps right away. And I think I think he's a really good player. I think he's a really elevated level of explosiveness. Like when you get there and you're at rookie camp and you're right on the sideline, you're 8 feet away from him, watching him go through his routes, and you're watching him go through his routes next to some other guys, that have been around that I've had, when it's one thing to do it at the Senior Bowl, right? Where everybody there is a rookie and, let's be frank, some of those guys aren't that good, but to do it here and I can, put him up against a guy named like Deuce Watts, who I watched practice with NFL players all last year. And I'm like, oh, okay. Look at Roman Wilson go. Like, I think it gives you a little bit better context. And man, I just think he's so explosive. He's got great hands. He's a good blocker. I think he's a perfect underneath threat for this offense. I think he's going to be a great third down weapon. I think Troy Fautanu is probably the better player, but I just think in terms of like guys that are going to come in right away and make a noticeable impact. Like, I don't know how much let me say this. I don't know how much better Troy Fautanu is going to be as a rookie than the combination of Chuks Okorafor and Broderick Jones were at right tackle last year. Like, they weren't great, but they weren't that bad. I think Roman Wilson's going to be a lot better than Allen Robinson this year as a rookie.
Now, here's another question I have for you. What if Roman Wilson is the number 2? What if he is basically where George Pickens was, and George Pickens is where Deontay Johnson was as far as like targets and what they're asked to do in this offense?
Well, I think it's possible that he could be the number 2 guy in terms of targets. I don't think he's going to play that much outside. I think they still need another body in that wide receiver room, or if not, it will be Van Jefferson playing that second outside receiver role. So I don't think he's going to do a lot of that. Maybe when they go to like some bunches and some of those condensed sets where you kind of are scheming up a free release, I think you could see him do some of that. But I don't think, like, if they're in a traditional 13 personnel, he's going to be the slot guy, right? I'm sorry, and 11 personnel. And so, I think he's going to play in the slot, but that doesn't mean he won't be second in targets. Like, he could be an important piece of this offense and grow as the year goes on. And so, I think he's going to get the ball a lot. I don't know if second or third, probably TBD, but I think they do still need somebody else on the outside.
So that's the thing that a lot of people are wondering. Can Roman Wilson play on the outside, or will he specifically be in the slot? We got to talk to Roman Wilson a bit on the second day, of Steelers rookie camp. Here was Roman Wilson when we got to ask him some questions, just cutting up some different responses he had. First impression of Zach, just working him as a receivers coach.
Coach Z? Yeah. Great guy, great coach, giving me a lot of details, helping me in my route details and understanding football. He's just a great guy, really. I really mess with him.
What's the biggest thing he's challenged you on so far?
Staying low. Yeah, I definitely, right now I'm playing a little high, so just getting low.
What's his energy like, Coach C's energy? What is he kind of like? It seems like he's really been really interactive with you out on the field.
I mean, that's kind of his energy. I wouldn't say there's like a vibe that comes off to him. He's just really serious, but also casual at the same time, and kind of just like takes no.
How much positional flexibility do you have? How much were you in the slot last year, and how much do you think you might have the potential to bump outside?
Yeah,
And do
I mean, I can't say for sure. I play both. That's who I am. I feel comfortable playing both, but I can't really put a number on how much I play both sides.
I know this is just the baby steps for everybody right now, but where they have you lining up so far with all this rookie camp stuff?
I'm just playing wherever they tell me. If that's inside, outside, I'm just going there. So it's probably a little bit of everything right now, maybe.
Do you study any of the tape of the offenses of Arthur Smith from Atlanta or Tennessee? What do you kind of take from those that you can see in the very early stages being applied here?
I watched the film on Atlanta and Tennessee. I think it's just as far as the receivers comes, detail, feet work, timing, things like that, just being where you're supposed to be at all times.
What's even like the work with?
Coach Smith? He's real cool.
Who had the better of it at the Senior Bowl? You or Quignon?
I say we went about 50-50. I got him a few times. He got me. So, I mean, he's a great dude. And, you got two good guys up there. One of you has to lose. So, he's a great guy, too.
So a lot of different things there. One, he started off talking about Coach Zach Azzani, the new receivers coach, who seemed to be really engaged with him, and I thought that was kind of interesting to hear. I haven't gotten a chance to talk to Zach Azzani yet, but I thought also was him talking about the willingness to kind of play wherever. That's kind of the standard rookie response. But looking back over his time at Michigan last year, he played about a third of his time as a receiver on the outside, where he played a large majority, almost 2/3 of his time, basically in the slot. The year before that, he was almost exclusively a slot receiver there. But you go back to 2021, way back when he first started getting like most of his snaps. He did line up. It was kind of a reverse. He lined up out wide, about 2/3 of the time versus, in the slot a third of the time. So he's kind of been all over the place. He has experience there, but I think it's interesting when he's talking about coming out high and trying to make sure he's getting down his fundamentals. Those are the things that can often be disguised better when you do line up in the slot, because those are the things that if you can polish those, that'll help you get free on the outside. Those are things that Deontay Johnson was very good at, and why he could get separation and beat the press. Whereas in the slot, it's a bit easier to work around those type of issues because of the space that you're granted naturally because of the spot.
Yeah, and there's not really like one way you have to do it. It's not necessarily about size. Deontay Johnson wasn't that big, 5'10",
right,
like 180 pounds or something like that. Roman Wilson's already bigger. But then like a guy like Chase Claypool, huge, like one of the biggest wide receivers in the league, struggled with it, right? And so it's about the combination of quickness and timing and strength and size. And I think when you're looking at a player that spent most of his college time in the slot, you're probably talking about a player that's going to start in the slot in the NFL, and then maybe you see if he goes somewhere from there. I also just think like this offense and its demands of its outside receivers, when you look at like last year, they only really had one, right? They only really had Drake London in Atlanta. But when you look at the Tennessee offense and when it was really humming, like Corey Davis was it was like a double X, right? Like it was like two big, deep downfield threats. There was not a like flanker type guy. And so I think you're going to see Roman Wilson do a lot, but I don't think he like can do certainly not right now. And like whether he plays outside or not, deep downfield threat is not his game, right? He's going to be an underneath guy. He's going to be a yak guy. He's going to be a move the chains guy, a good blocker. Like he's not your home run threat. And so I think they're missing another one of those in terms of like the pieces that this offense has had in the past to go along with George Pickens.
I want to talk more about Roman Wilson before we switch on to some of those topics. We'll do that here on the other side of this first break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. And if you're somewhere out there and you're trying to make the NBA playoffs, boy, there's a lot of action going on right now. The Nuggets and the Timberwolves head to Game 5 in Denver. And if you're in Denver, you want to be there to go see it. Get your tickets through Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. If you're in the Pittsburgh area, there's tons of concerts and events going on around right now, especially if you want to go see Paul Skeens when he returns to Pittsburgh very soon. Get tickets there on Game Time. There's also plenty of big events like the Kenny Chesney concert coming this summer. The Game Time app is something you could download right to your phone right now, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, because if you find tickets in the same section of row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, but just getting back on Roman Wilson here, because I think there's more to discuss here. I hear you on the part about, he's not going to be the deep ball thrower. He's not going to be the guy that goes up and gets everything. But I do think he's a guy that can get behind defenses. But I know there's some people that are thinking out there, wait a second, I've heard this before. That's what I heard about Calvin Austin. What do you think is a big separator from a Roman Wilson and a Calvin Austin as far as their talent and what they bring to the table?
I think Calvin Austin's faster. And I think he has, I think he's more of like a straight line speed guy too, whereas I think Wilson is more of that in and out. Like when you see the person and you see the explosiveness in the cuts and the changing of direction, okay? And to me, it is at a different level than what the RAS score showed. And certainly his RAS score was fine. Yeah. But the 4.3840, I think it's the suddenness, right? I think that's the part of it that really stands out to me. And I think that's where his game really is at a different place than someone like Calvin Austin. And then it's the size, right? He's big enough and plays bigger than even his size is, where he goes and engages bigger defenders. I think he can break tackles after the catch. I think he can hit people and deliver blows in the blocking game to a level that Austin just can't. Calvin Austin is not just short. He's a very skinny guy. He doesn't have like a ton of muscle on him, and that serves him well with that home run speed and as a punt returner. But I think in terms of being an over the middle underneath, I think Calvin Austin is more like a home run slot, right? Like he's like a deep threat that might play inside. Whereas I think Wilson is just that prototypical sort of underneath wide receiver that can move the chains and fight for tough yards and be an asset in the blocking game. And, they're going to run the ball a lot.
Yeah.
The wide receivers that are going to play are going to have to be guys who be willing and capable blockers. And he certainly is that.
A lot of Steelers fans have been saying, third round, blocking wide receiver, Hines Ward.
I mean, look, he's not as big as Hines Ward. There's a lot of similarities. It's not. It's
really good hands.
To call a guy who was a third round pick. Compare him to a borderline Hall of Famer. Yeah, like in some ways, sure. But like in other ways, I think stylistically, maybe not in what the results the Steelers are going to get, but stylistically, I think very similar players.
Another thing I think is cool to talk about too is his hands. I think he had some of the more reliable hands in this draft class. He could pluck a ball out the sky. I believe he had just one drop last year in all his targets. So he was pretty clutch there. Did very well in those situations. Also caught every single pass of his that he was targeted in the end zone. He pulled in every single one. Granted, it was only 7 of them, but he did that.
Only 7.
It wasn't like there were a bunch of other ones that he like.
He had 11 touchdowns. That's good.
That's and in Michigan's offense, that's my other thing about him.
Yeah,
like he could get used, I think, in so many ways that allow him to open up his.
He only had 40 catches.
That's my point.
He only had 40 catches and he had 11 touchdowns. Imagine if he played in an offense that was like moderately competent. Like,
Yeah.
And obviously Michigan was a good team, but like they weren't even trying to throw the ball.
Right. They knew their way there was beating. They were going to run the ball down your throats, play great defense, and roll from there. So
and look, the Steelers are going to run the ball a lot. And I think the fact that Wilson has been in that kind of offense and is going to be okay with it. Yeah, it's going to be a benefit to him as well. It's not going to be like somebody who comes from an air raid system and it's like a culture shock where he's like, oh, what do you mean you guys don't throw every down? Like, what is this crap? I think he'll fit right in.
Absolutely. I'm right with you there. Let's move on to our other topics here because we do got to get some things out the way. I want to talk about the new signing, Anthony Averett, the cornerback that they got in free agency. I want to preface this by saying nobody here is trying to say that Anthony Averett's coming in and changing up the whole game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is another solid depth piece that they're bringing in that has NFL experience. He didn't play last season due to injury. The last time he played was 2022, and I believe that was for the Raiders. But this isn't a guy who, in my opinion, jumps into the slot. Last year, the last time he played games, he would only play 10 snaps in the slot versus hundreds lining up outside. To me, this is your potential special teamer, veteran guy who comes in, gives you solid minutes. Maybe he plays gunner, something like that. He's a faster guy, but he's not taking away any snaps from Dante Jackson. He's not taking away any snaps from Joey Porter Jr. And I don't think that he is the slot cornerback that they're hoping will work with that position.
Yeah, I think to me, he really strikes me as the backup to Dante Jackson because all of the other backup corners are more like Joey, right? If you look at Corey Trice and Darius Rush and now add Ryan Watts to the mix, those are big, strong, long, but kind of a little bit stiff sometimes, physical cornerbacks. And Dante Jackson is that more fluid, pure speed guy. And I think Averett is much more similar to Jackson. It gives him another guy who fits that profile. And look, whether or not he makes the team or makes an impact, having that is important when you want to have a second version of your defense to run all summer, right? You want the twos to be able to run like the ones, and you want guys to be in roles that they might have. You don't want Darius Rush playing on the second team out of position and then have to and then need him later, and he hasn't been doing it all year, right? That's dumb. So I think it gives them a more natural balance to their roster by adding him. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm very intrigued by look, this is not a quality group of backup backup cornerbacks. I really like the potential of Trice and Rush and Watts, but they have a combined 20 snaps, something like that.
Yeah.
It's and Averett gives them somebody who has at least been there and done that, right? I just think it's very difficult to imagine going into a season with a position as important as quarterback just completely bereft of backups with any experience whatsoever. So, while he doesn't have maybe the same kind of ceiling anymore that those guys do, I think the fact that he has played, he's been there and done that is a very valuable asset to the cornerback room right now. I agree with you. I don't think he's the slot option. I think somebody else, he was not the slot when he was trying out at rookie camp. That was Beanie Bishop and maybe a little bit of Marquez Williams. So I think he is an outside guy, and they probably still need some help on the inside, but he certainly shores up the depth of that position, which was a big question mark, I think, before this.
Yeah, and listen, it still kind of is a question mark. We still need to see how he works out in other guys, but I think depth in the secondary is one of the areas the Steelers still need to address with with what they need, how they're moving forward. And they especially need to figure out what they're doing at slot cornerback, or do they have their slot cornerback of the future on the roster already? I'll talk more about that with Alan Saunders here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Because it's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL with baseball in full swing, that makes FanDuel your number one destination to place all your sporting bets right now. Go to FanDuel, and new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 or more bet placed today. That's right, $150 that you can put on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so many more ways to win at FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you'll make your first bet an automatic chance to get $150 right away by just hitting on a bet of $5 or more. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, slot cornerback is just as much of a question as any backup on the outside right now for the Steelers. Now, there are still people out there that are talking about they could still sign back Patrick Peterson and say, hey, do you want to play the slot? They could still sign Cameron Sutton, who's still a free agent. And you and I have talked about the potential of that, and waiting to see how that'll play out with the NFL and with the charges that were on him this past spring. Or they could also go back to Chandon Sullivan, or there's also a guy who they signed as an undrafted player in Beanie Bishop, who some people wonder if he could be the slot cornerback option. Alan, if you were to place odds, what would be your favorite as far as being the person who ends up starting game one, whenever that game one is for this Pittsburgh Steelers, at the slot cornerback position?
If I'm going to rank the guys that are on the roster right now, Beanie Bishop is the runaway favorite. I might take the field, though, and say that I think it's more likely they will add somebody with some vet experience there. Like, that's just not how the Steelers do business. They're not going to roll into the season with an undrafted rookie penciled into a starting spot. Like, that's just not their thing. They're going to wait and get into the summer and find somebody who's still around, whether that's Cam Sutton or Chandon Sullivan or Patrick Peterson or somebody else. You know, they've done this over the years many times. Look at last year, Quan Alexander comes in right at the beginning of training camp. They've signed other guys. When they signed Larry Ogunjobi, he was the summer signing after minicamp. He came in. They're going to look around and find somebody who's still sitting out there, and they're going to bring in a slot corner. But I don't think we should minimize Beanie Bishop's potential either. Like, he could be a pretty darn good slot corner. He is short. There's no way around it. He is a small guy. Yeah. On a good day, I think. On a good day, he says. And so they listed him at 5'10", which was, in my mind,
generous.
Some fiction there.
Fiction, straight up.
but I think it was 5'9" at the he wasn't at the combine, he was measured at West Virginia's Pro Day. But I think he has great closing speed and ball skills, which are wonderful assets when you're in that slot and you're not going to be able to jam a guy. It's hard to stay in phase all the time because the other receiver gets a free release, and a lot of times you're playing catch up. I think the question will be, he was a pretty willing tackler in college. I think his form could still use some work. Can he be as physical as the Steelers need their slot corners to be? Can he be that Mike Hilton guy? I don't think the Steelers were ever really comfortable with the combination they had there the last couple of years. They had Art Millette, they had Chandon Sullivan, they used Patrick Peterson in the slot, they used Cam Sutton in the slot, but they never really had like that guy to just take that role and grab it. I think Beanie Bishop certainly could be a part of the equation. Whether or not he grows enough to really grab that role, I think is probably a wait and see thing. And I think that's probably why they're going to want to add a veteran. And so you go into the year, like last year, it was Peterson and Sullivan, and the year before it was Sutton and Millette. And I think you can pretty easily pencil Beanie into a piece of that role. And then, hey, if he takes off as an undrafted guy and just earns it and wins it, then great, let him run with it. But I don't think he's going to be the only option for them going into the season.
Yeah, I also think they're going to make some sort of move just based off of it. And I think some of it might depend on, what they see out of Beanie Bishop when they get to training camp, because that's still where I think some of these moves will come. But I do agree. I don't see the Steelers sitting on their hands about slot corner. It's such an important position in today's NFL. You need, we're talking about Roman Wilson being in the slot and being a key factor there for the Steelers, next year. they're going to face, guys that are proven slot options and dangerous guys this upcoming season, that I think that they need to be prepared, and going and getting a guy like Beanie Bishop, or going and getting a guy who can help out against the slot in free agency. Those are going to be two major objectives. But like, let's break this down. Alan, if you were to predict how many more additional guys in the secondary get added to this roster before opening the opening day, the first kickoff of the season, how many would you say get added? Right?
Like, they certainly could add 2, but I think probably just 1.
Just 1, and you think that's the slot option?
Yeah, I think that's the slot guy. They could add another backup outside corner. I think it will depend on what, like, if the slot is someone like Patrick Peterson or Cam Sutton who can do both, then I think it's 1 guy. Okay. If the slot is someone like Shannon Sullivan, where you're probably only going to play them in the slot, then maybe you need 2.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Versatility is important. Mike Tomlin often talks about being able to do.
I think Pat Peter or Cam Sutton, that put a bow on it. Like, I think you feel good. Like, then you're talking about, like, it's Beanie Bishop or Ryan Watts or Darius Rush for 2 spots at the end of that secondary. I think that's a pretty solid. If you're cutting one of those guys, you got pretty good secondary.
Right. That's the other part of this, is that they're trying to fill out the depth chart right now. Joey Porter Jr. is still your top corner. You brought in Dante Jackson. He'll be your number 2 on the outside. It's about finding the slot and then finding 1 or 2 backups that can fit their cornerback. Because I also feel like they're pretty good at safety right now. At Minkah Fitzpatrick, the newly added Deshaun Elliott, and then you have DeMonte KZ. The Steelers got flexibility. The Steelers got talent. I think that they have
Trenton Thompson on the borderline of the roster right now too. It was pretty good when he had to play last year as well. I think they have difficult cuts in the secondary. If they add even 1, you start to add 2, it gets real difficult.
It will. And I think that's something that we talked about in this show too, is Trenton Thompson holding his own for the Steelers was a huge part of them holding that season together at the end of the year. So I do think that there's going to be some moves, or at least one. I'm with you. I think it's at least 1 move. I'm not sure if it'll be 2, but I think it all depends on what they see in training camp, what they see leading up to training camp, how the things perceive, and also like who becomes available. Because the other part of this is that, let's say there's just a team out there that's just like, you know what, we're not paying this slot cornerback X amount of dollars right now, because that's just, we can't afford it. And then all of a sudden the Steelers are like, we'll pay him, some of that money, and then they end up getting a guy, who just happened to fall into their lap, or just happened to be available at the right time.
Or the other way, right? The Steelers make a move and sign somebody now, and then it's August. It's like, oh, by the way, the NFL said Cam Sutton's been totally cleared. He can play the whole year, and he's just sitting there with nowhere else to go. Okay, well, yeah, all right, grab him too then. Like, I could see that. Or Patrick Peterson, same thing. He's still out there. Training camp starts. It's like, hey, you want a spot? Like, why not? Like, I think they could do that too.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know how to find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. And you can find me in my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive with Zachary Smith, Monday through Friday on our YouTube channel or anywhere where you get your podcasts.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every day, Monday through Friday on the Locked On Steelers podcast, right here talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers.